about 90% of doctors know very little about cannabis. So it's the public's duty to educate their doctors as well as the other way around, and we do that by this sort of education.
Welcome to the 101 podcast with Serena Organics, where we'll be talking everything to do with CBD. We'll be interviewing with a number of industry leaders to discuss the products itself, the benefits, and why people may be taking it. I'm David.
And I'm Joe. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Mike Barnes. Professor Mike Barnes is a cannabis physician and neurologist, and the first doctor in the UK to be able to prescribe medicinal cannabis under the then Prime Minister Theresa May. Since we've had you the last time, Professor Mike Barnes, you've also joined us as a scientific advisor, which we're so happy to have you on board as. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for asking me back. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for coming back.
Great to have you back.
We want to go back, I guess, for the benefit of the viewers who maybe haven't heard the podcast before and are new to CBD. I think one of the important things that David and I are trying to highlight is keeping consumers informed in terms of the benefits of CBD, how it interacts with the human body.
Sure, that's key.
So I think one of the first things probably to start on is this thing that everyone's talking about, CBD. Yeah. What is it? Where is it from?
Well, it stands for cannabidiol. It's a cannabinoid, as it's called, or more particularly a phytocannabinoid. That means it's a cannabinoid contained in a plant. There are other cannabinoids that we have in our own body. The plant cannabis contains, now it's gone up since last time, it's about 147 cannabinoids now. So people know of CBD, they know perhaps of THC, the one that gets you high, but they probably don't know much about the other 145. In fact, very few people know much about the 145. So CBD is one of those multiple cannabinoids. The plant contains other chemicals called terpenes and flavonoids that give the color and the smell to cannabis. But what we're talking about today is a cannabinoid CBD contained in the plant. It's not psychoactive, so that means it doesn't get you high, unlike its cousin THC, and has a number of really interesting medical properties. So in a nutshell, that's what CBD is and where it comes from.
Awesome. And I know you kind of touched on THC there and the difference between THC and CBD, which is a massive misconception when you tend to talk to consumers because they automatically say, oh, no. One of the main differences is THC being psychoactive, CBD not being. In terms of the interactions with the human body, what are the differences that that are important for consumers to know about that?
Well, you're quite right. If you mention cannabis and THC, people assume you're going to get high from it, but actually CBD counteracts that high. So if you combine, I'm talking about a medical prescription really now, if you combine CBD with THC in a prescription, you don't get high from it. And most people for medical needs don't want to get high. They want the benefit of the medicine. They don't want the recreational high. So THC gets you high, or probably, because it interacts with our own inbuilt endocannabinoid system. That's a system in the body that looks after the way nerves transmit their signals. And it interacts with that system very well. CBD counteracts that by also interacting with that system, but in a different way, and interacts with other systems in the body as well. So the mechanism of action of CBD is not entirely clear, but basically we know that it's a sort of anti-THC, you could put it like that, but it still enables its THC to have its medical properties, strangely, but it stops THC having its psychoactive, its high properties.
It's interesting you touched on the endocannabinoid system there, Mike. Such a fundamental part it plays in terms of both THC and CBD interacting with the body. Could you go into a little bit more detail around how it actually works?
I'll try. As I'm sure everyone knows, the body largely works through nerves. Pretty well everything we do, whether our seeing, our hearing, our moving our fingers, bladder, bowels, sexual function, everything is controlled by nerves. Where those nerves don't actually touch, they don't meet, so there's billions of nerves in the body. And if I give a silly example, if I want to wiggle my finger, I think up here, I need to wiggle my finger. That message goes down a nerve to my neck. It then links with a nerve in the neck to go down the arm to wiggle the finger. Where those nerves meet in the neck, they don't touch. There's a tiny gap in between called the synaptic cleft. And the signal goes across that cleft by means of chemicals being released from one nerve to the other nerve. Simple as that. What the endocannabinoid system does is switch that system off. So it's the big switch off, if you like. Once I've thought I might wiggle my finger, It's got to stop wiggling, or I'd wiggle it day and night. So you've got to switch that signal off. You can switch it off by thinking to yourself, I don't want to do it any longer. You can switch it off by metabolizing that chemical that's been released, but you can also switch it off, very importantly, by the endocannabinoid system doing that switch off for you. And our body has this inbuilt system, and it releases chemicals called endocannabinoids. There's two names just to throw at you as anandamide and 2-AG. They're natural cannabinoids. And they're released across that little gap, and they switch off the signal. And very simply and very crudely, that's what the endocannabinoid system does. And the plant, cannabinoids in the plant interact with that system. And that's why cannabis has such a wide variety of actions, because when you think about it, it interacts with all our bodily functions. It interacts with that switch-off mechanism, and that switch-off mechanism can control our eyesight, our hearing, our swallowing, our taste, our body functions. And that's, I suppose, the plant cannabis is its own worst enemy, in the sense that people say, well, it can't help anxiety and pain and epilepsy and everything else it does, because we're used, aren't we, to one pharmaceutical product doing one thing. You know, anti-blood pressure pill, all it does is reduce the blood pressure. An antibiotic, it kills some bacteria. We're not used to one chemical having a whole range of functions as diverse as that. But when you understand how the plant cannabinoids work, then you can understand how the cannabis medicine has such a wide range of actions, because it works through our inbuilt endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, and it's amazing the sort of breadth of benefits it can have when interacting with the body. And I think for any listeners who may not be aware of CBD and how it does work and the benefits it may have, what are the typical sort of benefits your patients or consumers see from CBD?
I suppose the first benefit that was changed the law in this country was childhood epilepsy. And it's CBD is remarkable at toning down, if you like, epilepsy, particularly for children, but for adults as well. So it's a very strong anticonvulsant. That, of course, does need a medical prescription, so it's a little bit different from the over-the-counter type medicines. In terms of numbers of people who could be helped, CBD really has a major impact on pain. That's probably number one. Two is anxiety or anxiety-related things like PTSD, or anxiety in the context of depression and such. That's a big problem in the world, and this country particularly. It does other things like help sleep, which in turn can help pain. Pain can be made worse by anxiety and by poor sleep. It can improve appetite. So probably they're the main things that it does. There's a few other bits and pieces. It reduces spasm when you've got conditions like multiple sclerosis. People have muscle spasm after stroke or MS, and that can called spasticity, and it can reduce that as well. So there's a long list of functions, but I think if I'd put them in order of importance, if you like, pain, anxiety, and epilepsy, and sleep.
And do you see a rise in people with specific health conditions come into, especially those chronic types of conditions come into for CBD?
Yeah, very much so. If you take pain, some extraordinary statistic recently is about a third of the population of this country have chronic pain. That's an incredible statistic. The statistic I had in my mind was 11%, but the government's own figures recently released show 34% had chronic pain. Anyway, it's a big problem. And of course, a lot of these people come to the end of the road for standard medicine, not necessarily medicine, but treatment like physiotherapy, acupuncture, exercise, dietary manipulation, but also painkillers. People come to the end of the road, they've still got pain. The doctor says, nothing else I can do for you. So there's a lot of people out there with chronic, untreatable pain, which CBD can help. Same with anxiety. People come to the end of the road of anti-anxiety, ways to help, medication, and particularly with epilepsy. Some of the young children with epilepsy have tried perhaps 20 licensed anticonvulsants. None of them have helped. And the doctor says, nothing else I can do for you. But they should try CBD. So CBD, it shouldn't be seen as the end of the road, the last resort. I don't agree with that. It shouldn't probably also not be seen as the first line of treatment, because there are licensed medications that have been sort of endless licensing hoops. Probably is reasonable to try them first. But for a lot of people, probably around 2 million people in this country have come to the end of the road of treatment with pain, anxiety, epilepsy and other conditions, and who would be candidates for trying medicinal cannabis, particularly CBD.
And Professor Mike Rounds, when we talk about, I guess, people with chronic pain and people who have come to CBD because of whatever ailment they're using, I guess in our quest of starting Serena Organics, it was born out of quality products. And obviously off the back of the work that David and I used to do in the US and Canada, we realized that the benefits of CBD will always fail if the quality of products themselves fail.
Exactly.
And while we're talking about people turning to CBD for whatever reason, how important is, in your medical opinion, the quality of products and how they're grown and how they're extracted? How is that important to the quality of the final product?
Well, it's paramount. You need to know what you're taking. If you're taking something into your body, I would like to know what's in it. You know, if I go and buy a packet of crisps from Tesco's or whatever, I have a right to know what I'm taking. So it's the same with cannabis medicines and CBD in particular. So I think there's two things I'd like to see. First is every company producing what's called a certificate of analysis. It sounds complicated, but it's very straightforward. It's just a list of components of that product, that batch. So you know exactly what's in it. And you know if there's any contaminants in it. They check it for things like heavy metals and pesticides and things like that. So you know it's pure, you know it's properly grown. You know, it should be grown under good quality conditions, something called GMP, good manufacturing practice, which means it's grown clean, it's grown healthy, and you can be reassured that the product is what it says it is. What's on the label is what's in the bottle. And sadly, there are some companies that what's in the bottle is not what's on the label. There's 258 CBD companies in this country. Some are really good, like Serena, of course. Some are less good. And I think the thing that differentiates the good from the less good is that certificate of analysis. You know what's in it, you know how it's been grown, and you can rely on the fact that it's a good quality, pure product. That's what it says on the label is what's in the bottle.
Yeah, and I think it's also important because I guess whenever we're speaking to people and people say that I've tried CBD before, it's never helped. Or we're talking to somebody, I think earlier today, and she said that all of her mates just get the shakes whenever they have it. And it always begs to differ, I guess, in terms of how products are grown, under what conditions, and whether they have heavy metals and pesticides and fungicides. And I guess for more people that are regularly drug tested, THC itself or any other cannabinoids which shouldn't be present in CBD that could have more detrimental impacts beyond health.
Yeah, you need to know that it's got no THC in it. Obviously, as a medicine, it's sometimes valuable to have a little bit of THC in it, but that makes it illegal for over-the-counter product. It needs to be prescribed. So there's nothing wrong with THC as a medicine, but as over-the-counter product, people need to be reassured it's got no or very, very little THC. The actual regulation is it's got to have less than 1 milligram per container, which is tiny, tiny amount. And it's actually very difficult to get rid of all those so-called contaminants. Not really contaminants, but it's very difficult to get rid of them all. But you can do, and people have a right to know that this product doesn't have any THC or a legal tiny amount in it.
So when we talk about the finished product in itself, for instance, in terms of the administration of CBD, you know, a lot of people, when they are looking to buy, there are topicals, there are tinctures, there are edibles. The question that we always get is, which one should I use for me?
Yeah.
And how would you answer that question for our viewers and for those looking to buy products in terms of what they should buy and for what specific causes?
I think the best way to take CBD from a medical point of view is definitely under the tongue, so-called buccal or sublingual. Now, why do I say that? First of all, it gets in the body system very quickly, within a minute or so.
When you say the body, is that the bloodstream?
In the blood. It gets in the bloodstream, very quickly. So you get a good effect very fast, as opposed to taking it oral or swallowing it, which is nothing wrong with that at all. And some people, flavoured gummy bears and things like that are absolutely fine. But the problem with that is, first of all, there's a delayed effect. So it can take between half an hour and 2 hours to get into the bloodstream. And secondly, it has what's called, I don't want to complicate it too much, but it's called first-pass metabolism. That means it goes from the stomach through the liver. As it passes through the liver, it gets partly metabolized to something else. It begins to break down. So what you get in the bloodstream is not actually what you swallow. Therefore, the effect is not quite as reproducible as putting it under the tongue. And the final thing that makes it a little bit difficult, take it orally, is what's in the stomach already. And cannabis loves fat. It's lipophilic. It's absorbed much, much better with this fatty meal in the stomach already. And for the children with epilepsy, for example, we often say take it with a spoon of mayonnaise just beforehand, and that gives a much better absorption. I mean, probably 60% better absorption than if you've taken a non-fatty meal beforehand. So you've got the variability of what you've eaten or just eaten, the variability of the liver, and the delayed effect. It's okay as long as you're consistent. But if people want a consistent effect, which most people do, you've got to do the same thing. So you've got to take it with the same sort of meal just beforehand. So people don't fully understand that. So if they say it works great one day and doesn't work the next, it may be that they're not being consistent with how they take it. If you put it under the tongue, all that's removed, and it's a very consistent and very quick effect. So if you can do it that way, that's the best way to do it. Some people can't, children, people with learning disabilities. Frankly, some oils taste awful. Serena's doesn't. That's a big advantage, actually, to make it taste, not quite tasteless, but nearly tasteless, because the raw CBD hemp oil tastes pretty foul, actually, and holding it in your mouth for any period of time
60 seconds.
is not easy. So that's another advantage of Serena is its purity and its taste, or lack of taste, more particularly.
Yeah, we purposely chose MCT as a carrier oil within our tinctures to help remove that very hempy, sort of earthy taste. For
some like it. I find that weird how they do like it, because I think it's horrible. But you added orange, haven't you, and peppermint as well, which is fine, and it just takes that taste out of it and makes people more likely to perhaps to hold it in their mouth a bit longer.
And I guess for those with maybe more, maybe those that suffer from maybe arthritis, or those that use the gym, we also have topicals.
Yeah, that's great. That's fine.
What do you think of topicals as a administration of CBD?
For surface, if you like, conditions like aches and pains in the muscle, just under the calf muscles after running. For some medical conditions like some local arthritis in a finger or one joint, or for some skin conditions like psoriasis or eczema. That's absolutely fine, because it gets absorbed a little bit into the skin. It goes underneath the skin, so to the muscle underneath, for example. So it's a very good way of localizing and focusing the treatment. And a little bit of that will get into the bloodstream, but tiny, tiny amounts. So if you've got a painful calf or two painful calves after running, the best thing is to rub a topical on those calves, and it will just stay there and ease the pain in the calves.
I think that's what you use for your shoulder.
Absolutely, yeah. I find the topical range, we get excellent feedback, especially from consumers who suffer with joint pain, whether that may be through rheumatoid arthritis or other specific conditions where they do have chronic pain. We were recently at a London Marathon event, a yoga event, where a lot of people were performing exercise and obviously post-running, which experienced a lot of DOMS, for example, a lot of joint pain, a lot of muscle pain from the micro tears they have from the exercise. So they found the topical range to be extremely helpful. Yeah,
it is very good. It would take more than CBD to help me recover after a marathon, I have to say. It takes a great deal of alcohol, amongst other things, but unless we're getting off topic. But for proper athletes, it's very good for the DOMS and general aches and pains after exercise, a session at the gym. It works really well.
There is a question that I wanted to ask you, because you talk about events. I feel uncomfortable sometimes because when people come to our stand or they purchase a product and maybe they have arthritis, you spoke about localized pain. There's a woman with multiple sclerosis, or another was somebody else with arthritis, and they were using the cooling gel. And they came back like 10 minutes later, like screaming like it's a miracle, and she's going like this, and starts to feel uncomfortable, because it almost seems as though we pay the person when it's actually genuinely the person's reaction to something they've used and something that's disturbed them for a very long period of time. In terms of effects and noticing the effects, how soon, and that's a question that we always get from people, whether it's they're taking it orally or they're taking it underneath the tongue or it's a topical, how soon should they tend to see results, and how long typically will those results equally last?
That's a very good question. Most people, you get some effect pretty quickly. As I said earlier, under the tongue, you'll usually get some effect within a few minutes. Taking it into the stomach, taking it orally, that can be delayed a couple of hours. Now, it's not absolutely that clear, because obviously it depends on the dose. And if you're new to CBD, you should start with a low dose, because some people are quite sensitive. I would start personally with a very low dose of around 10 milligrams, to put a number on it. Now, 10 milligrams for most people won't do a thing. So you've got to always educate the people and say, well, start low, 10 milligrams-ish, and build it up very slowly every few days, maybe every 3 or 4 days, increase it to 20, 30, 40, etc. So some people do give up too soon. There are some companies that say, take a maximum of 30 or 40, 50 milligrams, and most people won't respond at that level. The average dose for response is between 60 and 100 milligrams. So if you stop at 60, most people won't have had an effect. Stupidly, and if I can become political for a moment, if you allow me to do that, the Food Standards Agency says the maximum daily dose should be 70 milligrams, which is daft. And they've made this number up out of thin air, because if the average dose is 60 to 100 milligrams, and they say stop at 70, you're automatically excluding 3/4 of the population from the benefits of CBD on no basis whatsoever. So I would say ignore that FSA. They can sue me if they want to. It is remarkably safe, and there's no maximum as such. The children, for example, can go up to about 10, 11 milligrams per kilogram. Now, that could be 400, 500, 600 milligrams, and they're children. So adults, generally though, if you build it up to 150, 160 milligrams and you've got no effect, then probably you're not going to, probably. But that's the sort of dose. So a lot of people who say it doesn't work for me, some of them won't have tried a big enough dose, basically.
Yes, it's a good point to make, because as Joe rightly mentioned, there are a lot of products out there on the market. We often have consumers come to us saying, I've tried CBD before and it doesn't work for me. Or they'll be either skeptical. And I think the first question we always ask them is, how strong was the product? And
exactly.
Most of the time, they actually don't know. No. But I think to give a bit of context, for a lot of brands out there that are selling maybe in supermarkets, for example, in easy-to-have drinks, they're typically around about 20 milligrams.
Yeah, but yes, and a lot don't give a recommended dose or dose escalation, and that's key. Always start low, increase very slowly and gradually, and I think that should be on the labels. Because also it's not that great to go in at 60, but go in at 100 milligrams because it might be too much for some people. So always start low and increase gradually over 2, 3, 4 weeks, that sort of time, and get to know the dose that suits you, because it's a very personalised medicine, very personalised. It's highly variable. There's not many medicines where 10 milligrams can suit one person and 200 suit another person. So it does need to be taken carefully, and people need educating, which is why I'm very happy to do this sort of podcast, because people do need educating about these things, and many companies don't do the education at all, let alone accurately.
And I think it's very important that you highlighted that the most effective way of consuming CBD is through the oil drops, really. Yeah. Because it gets quicker into the bloodstream, and you do avoid that digesting process where you can actually miss out on some CBD. So even in some of those drinks or edibles where they're having like a 20 milligram CBD product, they could even lose some of that in that process.
Yes.
Whereas, for example, we offer from 1,000 up to 4,000, which is the highest available on the market, and people could then administer based on their own personal tolerance, whether they want to start low at a 20 milligram dose, or they can increase it up to that 100 milligram, as you mentioned. Another interesting question we do get asked by our consumers based on the oil drops is, a lot of people see different products out there in the market, obviously varying strengths and varying size, but they'll also see products for different times of day. So whether that's like a day drop, or a night drop, a sleep drop, a calming drop. There's a lot of different branded products out there for different reasons, should we say. Yeah.
Confusing.
It can be a little bit confusing. Is there any difference in the CBD in those products based on how they're being branded?
Well, I mean, CBD is CBD. It's the same chemical. There's not a little tweak you can do to make it better for sleep, or a little tweak you can do to make it better for anxiety. It's nonsense. So CBD is the same chemical. Now, some people, in fairness, do mix the CBD with other things. I mean, there's lavender, for example, helps sleep. Some of the so-called terpenes in the product give cannabis its smell. Some of those are very good. Myrcene is one, for example, that is very good for sleep. So some people might add a little bit of that in. So it depends a little bit what's in it, and you can make it good for sleep or you can make it good for daytime, but it's not the CBD that's doing that, it's the other things you added into it that does that. So yeah, there's some people who just have CBD in the bottle, and they say they market one for nighttime, one for daytime, one for anxiety, one for pain. It's complete nonsense. CBD is just CBD.
Okay, that's good for us and our listeners to know.
And I think for the listeners as well, because I think that's one of the key questions we always get, especially for people who are new to the industry and they've come to CBD as a solution, but they're just then confused because they then see a day and night drop. But for instance, with some, maybe there are no other active ingredients that may help for specific purposes.
Exactly.
But rightly so, there are some products out there where they do have some other active ingredients that do help for maybe pain or do help for sleep or more concentration or clarity and whatnot. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And while we're on this education piece, I guess, in terms of one of the things that we want to do is make sure that consumers are well informed to be able to buy these products. And I guess with CBD, there's been a massive stigma in terms of what it is and what it can do. We spoke about the daily dosage. One of the questions that we always get asked is, can you overdose on CBD? And could you help us answer that?
Well, overdose in a sense, can you overdose in a sense, can you take too much of it? Can you swallow the whole bottle? Yes, of course you can. You can overdose in that sense on any medicine known to man. The more important question is, if you overdose, does it do you any harm? And the answer to that for cannabis generally is no. With THC products, it can be unpleasant if you overdose. You can get quite anxious and very fast heart rate. You can get a little bit psychotic sometimes if it's a big overdose. But the important thing is you don't die from the overdose. CBD is much, much safer than THC. You don't die from THC overdose. It might be unpleasant, but you don't die from it. CBD, it's not really any problem at all. And the side effects of CBD really are the sort of 4 Ds. That's easy to remember: dizziness, drowsiness, dry mouth, and sometimes diarrhea or stomach cramps. And that's really all you get with CBD. So if you take a lot more than you should, either by design or by accident, okay, you might get a very dry mouth, you might feel a bit unpleasantly dizzy, but that's all that's going to happen to you. So can you overdose? Yes, of course you can. Can you overdose and give yourself any harm? Almost certainly not.
And I think, that's quite reassuring for a lot of people, I guess, especially people who, while we were out in the US, which also leads to another question, is stuff like the opioid crisis, which a lot of people were in situations where they were overdosing and then facing the consequences of those, which I guess weren't pleasant, and a lot of that leading to death.
Yeah.
So I guess it's quite reassuring to kind of know that. And then the second one is more the addiction of that. A lot of things that we are looking at here in the UK is the addictiveness of certain medications and other coping mechanisms that people have, such as maybe tobacco and snus. Could you shed some light on the addictiveness of CBD and how it can be used to combat other medications that people may be on as well?
Yeah, basically you can't get addicted to CBD, full stop. You can to THC if you take very high THC street cannabis. We're not talking about medical cannabis or over-the-counter, anything remotely like it, but street cannabis, something like 9% is meant to be the figure that can get dependent on it. You know, they need it. They're not properly addicted, and they're not necessarily going to withdraw if they don't stop taking it, but they really do. Their life depends on it, which isn't healthy. That's about 9%. That's much less, incidentally, than tobacco or alcohol. So in that sense, it's much safer than tobacco or alcohol. But you can get dependent on it. But CBD, as we said earlier, counteracts the effect of the THC. So actually, it's a perfectly good treatment for cannabis, called cannabis dependency syndrome, or cannabis use disorder, the two names from it. You can wean people off their dependence on street high THC cannabis by substituting slowly but surely CBD. So it can get them off. So if it's much safer, it's the opposite of cannabis dependency. You can actually, medically speaking, wean people off that dependency of the street cannabis, but you won't get dependent or addicted in any way to over-the-counter CBD.
So then I guess for those then essentially that are on other medications and maybe it's not even prescribed to them and they're using it more as coping mechanisms, would you say that CBD is definitely a better potential alternative to what they're currently on for that specific reason as well?
Yeah, CBD mixes with virtually all medicines. I mean, the proper answer I have to give on camera is if you're on prescribed medication, you need to consult your doctor if you want to take CBD. The fact that your doctor will probably know nothing about it is irrelevant, but that's the proper answer. But in practical terms, if you're on other medication, with CBD, it mixes perfectly well with virtually everything. There's a couple of small print exceptions, particularly with children with epilepsy. You've got to be careful of two anticonvulsants called clobazam and sodium valproate, but pretty well you can be on any prescribed medication and be okay with CBD, but do ask your doctor beforehand. Also, so he or she knows what you're taking, because it's important, I think, that you're honest with the doctor. Doctors need educating as well as patients. And I think it's great if people go to their doctor and say, don't necessarily say, should I be on this? Because a lot of doctors will say, no, don't be silly. But some over-the-counter particularly say, I've tried this and it's really helped. Go and tell your doctor. And then that doctor will be educated, because we shouldn't forget that a lot of the public understandably don't know much about it, but a lot of doctors don't either. I would go to the far say about 90% of doctors know very little about cannabis. So it's the public's duty to educate their doctors as well as the other way around, and we do that by this sort of education.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so fundamental that we're actually having a discussion like this to help educate our listeners and the wider audience.
Exactly.
I think based on what you've just been saying, there's a lot of people who currently could be taking one or several medications for reasons such as anxiety or pain or whatever it might be, and can look at CBD as more of a natural alternative solution to that, where they're not necessarily taking pharmaceutical drugs, which can come with side effects, can come with addictive properties to them, like Joe touched on the opioid crisis. So I think it's definitely something for people on medication to be considering, especially if they're looking for a specific health condition. I think one thing Joe and I definitely notice, though, is there is a stigma attached with CBD because it comes from cannabis. We can be at events talking to people, and the minute we say the word cannabis, you just see the reaction. They're no longer interested. It's almost like they've made their mind up based on previous associations with cannabis and how it's traditionally been known in the past. So how do you, or how would you recommend to us or anyone listening, how do you suggest that people sort of remove that stigma, or how can you help remove that stigma?
Well, you're quite right. It's very difficult. There's a lot of people who just switch off. Doctors as well, let alone politicians and others. Cannabis, it's bad. And, we've had, from about the 1930s, we've had nearly 100 years now, 90 years of anti-cannabis propaganda, a lot of which was completely untrue. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So there's quite a big hill to climb in many people's minds. I think that for CBD, first of all, it's important to say that it's remotely like street cannabis. I know people say it's the same plant. Of course it's the same plant, but it's a totally different product. I think people need educating. This is not the stuff. It's nowhere remotely like the stuff you'll get on the street corner, or bringing up your app and getting the recreational cannabis. Is completely different. And I think people need educating about the CBD versus THC issue. The CBD is a counter effect to the THC. And just generally being honest and open. I mean, this sort of discussion we've had here, for people who've listened from beginning to end, they want to hopefully now understand that, there's a big difference between CBD and medical THC to the street variety. So I think when you go and talk to the public, it's an education program and nothing much else. Just keep on educating.
That's our mission.
That is our mission. And I think since the last time we've had you on the podcast, there's been a lot of changes, even in the UK, obviously with non-foods. In the US, for instance, there's been the decriminalisation of cannabis as a whole, with those that have been incarcerated or those that have been arrested for even the street value type. But in terms of since lockdown here in the UK, how have you seen the industry shift and change its perspectives and legislation, and what's your views on that?
Well, we're making slow progress. It's nearly, in fact, tomorrow is the 4th anniversary of the legalisation of cannabis for medical purposes in this country. And we've still got 3 NHS prescriptions. So you could say we've made virtually no progress. I think there were 3 when we last talked. So you could say we've come absolutely nowhere.
The first one you helped?
The first one we wrote for Alfie Dingley. And he's doing brilliantly. His mother wouldn't mind me saying that to you. He's over 2 years seizure-free now.
Amazing.
So he's doing remarkably well. But where have we come? Ignoring the NHS, I'll come back to that maybe, We have grown slowly but surely. We've got 25 cannabis clinics now. This is the medical side. I'm not talking about the over-the-counter side at the minute. 25 cannabis. There's 18 different producers with products in the country, medical products, let alone 258 CBD companies. And there's now just over 20,000, probably approaching to 22,000 patients being prescribed, all bar 3 privately. So we've come a long way, but we've come nowhere near far enough. If you think there's probably around 2 million people who benefit from a medical prescription, again, let alone the over-the-counter CBD, we've got about 1% of the population. People say, great, 20,000, that's a big number, but it's actually not a big number who would benefit. What can we do about that? That's a long, complicated question. I think there's 2 main things that the government could do, is to change the law so GPs can prescribe. At the moment, it says hospital consultants. That will make a big difference. We think about 1/3 of GPs will be willing to prescribe after training. You don't need more than that. You need big practice. You just need perhaps one partner who's the cannabis partner, if you like. That will make a big difference. Getting rid of some of the silly bureaucracy if I write a prescription today, I've got to get the prescription approved by at least two of my peers. There's no other medicine I know that I make that decision and got to get it checked by 2 other doctors. So that could go. So the things the government could do. The other group is the doctors themselves. There are senior medical bodies, like the British Paediatric Neurology Association, who are implacably against cannabis for reasons I really don't know. I don't understand why they're so implacably against it for those who come to the end of the road of their pain treatment, anxiety treatment, their epilepsy treatment. NICE, some viewers might know, there's a body called NICE in this country, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, that looks at the cost effectiveness of medicine, and they came out against cannabis because they looked at it as a pharmaceutical product, not a plant product. They could look at that properly, and that will give doctors the reassurance that it is safe and proper guidance to use it. So there's a lot we could do that hasn't happened since we last talked, but equally there's now, I think when we last talked, there was probably no more 1,000 or 2,000 people prescribed. I can't remember the timing, but it's going up about 1,000 to 1,500 patients a month. That's great, but they're paying that out of their own pocket, and they shouldn't have to pay it out of their own pocket because it's legally allowed on the National Health Service. So why are these people, and some people, particularly for the children, need bigger doses, cost more money. Some are going out and selling their houses, literally selling their businesses, going out to endless coffee mornings and raffles and sponsored walks and things. There's one this weekend. So, why are people having to do that for the health of their own children when it's a legal product? So the government and some of my fellow doctors have got a long way to go yet.
You can see the extremes where people are going to just to get their hands on the products. And you think a review of that will show how beneficial these people are finding it when they're taking CBD?
We're doing our best. We have a project called 2021, which was meant to get 20,000 people recruited to this trial by the end of last year. We didn't get there because of COVID and the lack of progress. But that's looking at, as an observational study, we've now got 3,500 people recruited. So we just record what's happening to them. And that evidence is slowly coming out now. We looked at the side effects after 3 months, and a remarkable statistic, which will apply to CBD as well, is that 97% of the people who prescribed cannabis, again this is prescription cannabis, had no side effects at all. 97%.
No side effects.
No side effects. And so 3%, and those 3% did have some side effects. They were mild, like the things we mentioned earlier, dizziness, drowsiness, dry mouth, mild and no great consequence. A tiny handful of people had more serious problems like severe dizziness and whatever. So it's a remarkably safe product, and we need to produce that evidence that shows people, A, that it works, and B, that it's safe. And it applies to over-the-counter products as well. I mean, we know they're safe, but we need accumulating evidence to show that and to demonstrate that, how good they are for some things and how safe they are, particularly, are the 2 main criteria that we need to work on.
Definitely. And it sounds like it's been painful progress in the last 2 years since we last spoke.
Sometimes I think we're getting there.
With that education in itself, then how do you see the industry changing over the next 5 years with your 2021 project in mind?
Well, I think we'll see more of the same, definitely. So I sat here in another year, we'd have probably been up to 40,000 patients, something of that order. Some of the studies, like the 2021 project, will have accumulated more evidence to show people. I would like to see more of an incremental change. I think if we did that in 5 years' time, we'll have perhaps 100,000 people, and there begins to be a tipping point where you've got 100,000, whatever number it is, 150,000, who go out, they tell their doctor, they tell their friends, they tell their family, they tell their hospital consultant, and finally something gets through some of these thick skulls. But that's a slow process. That will happen. What I'd love to see is something more incremental change and get this on the NHS, and what we're doing at the moment through the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society and the Cannabis Industry Council is a lobby project. Going to government, I've just 10 minutes ago checked the open letter to the new health secretary to say, come on, let's sit round a table, let's see what we can do better here. And I think they might listen. I think politicians, if I can be cynical for a moment, don't hugely take much notice of the medical benefits. They pay lip service to that. What speaks to politicians is money and jobs. And if you promote the cannabis industry as an industry, like yourselves, there's around about 100,000 jobs can be created, or partly created, can be created, about 100,000 jobs in the cannabis industry, if you extrapolate from experience in some of the US states. And more particularly for that, probably around £1 billion of tax income. I thought I'd be the last person to promote tax income, but I think it's better that there is tax income from income tax and corporation tax than putting it in the hands, £1 billion plus, in the hands of the criminal fraternity. So, surely that speaks to politicians. Post-Brexit, post-COVID, can you really say no to £1 billion of tax income and 100,000 jobs? So that's what we're trying to push to the politicians. And when we get some stability in the government, and we have a health secretary who stays there and a home secretary who stays there for more than a few weeks, then maybe we'll make some progress.
Yeah, we need someone to get their feet under the table.
Well, we need some stability first, which
yes.
we're still all hoping for. But Professor Mike Barnes, this has been very, very interesting, I guess, for ourselves as well. I've learned some new things from the last time we spoke, and hopefully for the viewers here today as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for asking me. I'll come back in a few years and tell you where we've got to.
Please do.
Well, hopefully there's much more progress than this. But thank you so much. And for our viewers who have watched today, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's podcast and found it super insightful. We'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts. So please feel free to reach out to us at any of our social handles, which is Serene Organic CBD. That is on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can also reach out to us at info@sereneorganics.com. And if you want to get in touch with Professor Mike Barnes, who wears many hats, you can feel free to reach out to him at Professor Mike Barnes at sereneorganics.com, and we'll be sure to get everything across to you.